Murphy as a franchise system, great system. I'm glad to have gotten my start with them. When you join a franchise system, candidly, the value proposition diminishes as you go. Because as you get more experience, you start to feel like, hey, I don't need any more training. And so I felt like if there was more lead generation seemed very important to me. I don't know how anybody listed their business with me. I was 22 years old. I, didn't even know, which direction I was going. And I did, though. I got a lot of good listings, sometimes for as much as $2 million listings. And what I learned from that was just, again, being utterly candid, was the bar was so low. I was this kid that would answer the phone and show up and aggressive, a little more aggressive than the general business broker community. So try to play in an area where the barrier of entry is low and the standards are low and you can dominate. And in the home services space, I think that's the case too today.
So today I got to sit down with Dan Claps, who is a serial entrepreneur in the franchise space. So Dan's done some really interesting things in the franchise space and is now the CEO of Voda Cleaning and Restoration, which is an industry disrupting franchise. Now, I don't bring many franchisors on the podcast, but Dan has a really unique story, something that he's doing that I find really unique in the franchise space, and has some really interesting experience that I just thought would be really valuable for you. So he's got a lot of insights, not just into the franchise space, but also into building successful businesses. So this is an episode that you're not going to want to miss. Let's jump in. Welcome to the Franchise Empire Show. I have a special guest, Mr. Dan Claps. Dan, thanks for joining me today.
It's great. I'm honored to be on. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, I want to unpack a few things about you and your background, but, before we do, tell us about what is Franchise Playbook and Voda Cleaning and Restoration.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Franchise Playbook is an incubator of franchise brands. What we do at Franchise Playbook is really create, own, and operate dynamic franchise brands in the home services space. I've been in the industry for about a decade, and what I saw was that there were two challenges as a franchisor. You've got operations, and then you've got development, franchise development, awarding territories. And over the past 5 to 10 years, there's been an emergence of companies that really help with the development side, franchise sales side of the business, but often that accelerated growth leaves franchisors with maybe less operational support than they need and maybe not the capital to do so. And so what we've created is really an incubator that provides both the development and the operations. We actually are the franchisor. And so what we've done is our first brand is we've acquired a restoration company called Voda Cleaning and Restoration, where we put in all the capital, we take all the risk, we do all the development, all the operations, and we allow that original founder to see that business thrive and become a national franchise brand.
Cool, man. And I'm excited to unpack it. And I think it's important for, whoever's watching to understand your background. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I get multiple emails a week from companies asking to run ads on the podcast. I could have ads if I wanted to, but I don't. So there are two ways that you can help to support me and the podcast to keep it ad-free. First is to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment, even a smiley face if you have nothing to say. The YouTube algorithm only shows the video to more people based on the likes and comments on the video. So your comment could help someone get exposed to this, and not to sound too cheesy, but it could legitimately change their life. Lastly, go ahead and share this with someone that you think will enjoy this episode. Maybe someone who loves business and entrepreneurial stuff, or maybe it's someone who's been saying that they want to own their own business for forever. You can message it to them directly or share it on your social media. It would mean the world to me. You guys rock. Enjoy. So here's something that, that's really interesting, I think, about what you're doing. And I don't really have franchisors really onto this podcast much, but here's what I thought was really interesting is how you're documenting your journey of building the business and bringing on franchisees, supporting franchisees. So before we talk, dive into your background a little bit, why do you think that it's so important to do that in this day and age, really documenting your journey, the challenges you're going through, like as a business owner and franchisor.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you recognizing that because you have tremendous content, and I've always followed your content, and I've been in, as I said, in the franchise space for about 10 years. I got in 2014, and I was in my early 20s. I've grown up in franchising. My first really outside of a small business I had in college, my whole career has been in franchising, and early in, I learned that the candid documenting of my career seemed to get a lot of attention. I'll never forget. I, it might seem like I like taking these videos and I'm comfortable on camera. It's actually not that comfortable. And I'll never forget about 7 years ago, this LinkedIn consultant, I had him come to my office and he was just kind of giving me some pointers. And he said, let's take a video together. So we took my phone, and this is again 7 years ago, so it was even less prevalent that you do like selfie videos. And he took my phone and we did a little video selfie. And he said, post it on LinkedIn. And I said, well, let me look at it. He said, no, don't look at it. You'll never post it. Just post it. So I post it, and then I look at it about an hour later. It's already got a lot of views. So it's too late to take it down, right? And I'm embarrassed. I think it looks ridiculous. But I decide to commit to that, and I post a video every day. And thinking nothing's really, what's the point of this? It's kind of a waste of time, but it's free to do. It takes 2 seconds. And I go to an event in franchising about 3 months later, and all I hear about from people is the videos. I watched it. I heard your story. And so since then, I've always realized that it's a free way to get exposure, and people appreciate just absolute candor. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And I think it's something that actually, franchisees should really do more, because it can really help them in their community and develop a relationship where people then, people reach out to us and they want to do business with us just because they're like, hey, Tariq, I feel like I know you, like I know your story, like I can connect with it. And so it creates a totally different bond, when you're potentially doing business with someone. And I think that, there's a lot of franchisees, and I know we'll get into how you guys support franchisees and what you're doing, but I just think it's interesting that there's a lot of franchisees that don't really take advantage of actually creating content or just documenting their journey building their business.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say it only because like I'm actually right now I'm standing in a kitchen in our new facility in Wisconsin. I live in New York, but our new corporate headquarters is here in Madison. This is my first time here. I signed it in the lease sight unseen. Came here with like a lot of fear. Like, what if I made a mistake? And I'm absolutely in love. And so I just took a video, literally like my phone. It's not even like nice angles, but it's just like, hey, community, check out the office. And it really goes a long way. And I try to also show not everything's rainbows and butterflies when you own a business. So I try to also show, not too often because I don't want to be negative, but I try to show the ups and the downs.
Yeah.
So franchisees should absolutely do that. Sorry.
Yeah. So you alluded to how you've been in franchising for about 10 years. So tell us about how you got started, I believe back at Murphy Business Brokers or something like that. So how did you wind up getting into this to even get to the point of becoming a franchisor?
Yeah. Well, maybe similar to you, I've always been an entrepreneur, like in my gut, in my heart. I was a kid selling lemonade and lacrosse balls, and I'd sell anything that I could get my hands on since I was a little kid. And I loved I'll never forget I had a job at the YMCA teaching swim lessons. And, I made more money doing that. But if I had a business where I made something and turned it into money and made money out of like air, it fascinated me, even if I had to work twice as much time and make half the money, which has changed as I've gotten better at being a business owner. But so, in college, I had a staffing business in the event staffing space. But I learned that I really had more of a job than a business. And in my early 20s, I went to sell that business and I couldn't because it was too much dependent on me. And so learned a hard lesson from that, wound that down, and started looking at franchise opportunities and just fell in love with the process of exploring them. And so I joined Murphy because Murphy is a franchise for franchise and business brokers. And so I started out as a business broker in 2014 and somehow just started picking up franchise resales. And then that led to kind of my franchise journey, ever since then.
Oh, interesting. And I feel like wow, we could go down a rabbit hole that I'll opt to not do at the moment because franchise resales are something that are really fascinating to me. I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of people don't know about. It's something that I do like to talk about, but yeah, maybe we'll save that for later or another time because I want to make sure we hit on certain things. But what do you feel like was the biggest thing that you picked up in that experience and being a business broker, which is no small feat, like coming straight out of college. Like that's a serious deal there to be, helping people buy businesses and structuring the deals. Like this is some complex stuff. So like, what do you feel like was the key kind of core that you learned that you then took on to the next thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Murphy as a franchise system, great system. I'm glad to have gotten my start with them. But what I learned was as a franchise system, an area that I felt like, when you join a franchise system, candidly, the value proposition diminishes as you go. Like, because as you get more experience, you start to feel like, hey, I don't need any more training, right? After a year or two, 3 years. And so I felt like if there was more lead generation to help me find customers, that's something that would be important. And so I always held on to that. And we'll come to that, where what we're doing at Voda later. But lead generation seemed very important to me. But what I learned was, well, first of all, I don't know how anybody listed their business with me. I was 22 years old. I, was probably, didn't even know, which direction I was going. And I did, though. I got a lot of good listings, sometimes for as much as $2 million listings, especially franchise resales. And what I learned from that was just, again, being utterly candid, was the bar was so low. I was this kid that would answer the phone and show up and aggressive, a little more aggressive than the general business broker community. So one of the things I learned was try to play in an area where the barrier of entry is low and the standards are low, and you can, dominate. And in the home services space, I think that's the case too today.
That's it. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. That it's true. So I have a buddy of mine that I had on the podcast where I'm trying to convince him to franchise the business, but he's in the TV mounting space.
Oh
And
yeah.
he created this insane brand that it's similar. Well, one, he's a great marketer, right? And so he was able to leverage his skill set in marketing, and he just crushes the competition because he created this amazing brand and persona called the Mounting Man. And
Hmm.
that like he said, the bar is set so low. These people, they don't show up on time, they no show, they're not reliable. And so he's really able to dominate the competition. So I think that's actually a really interesting, perspective for business owners or aspiring business owners to think about. Or yeah, where have I had a poor experience lately, and maybe that's an opportunity, for me to jump into. Cool, man.
Absolutely.
So tell us about, okay, so then after Murphy, you then went and started a lead generation company supplying franchise consultants, brokers, and then eventually franchisors. So is that how you got the idea to do that from Murphy? Like thinking, hey, I don't kind of have enough leads, or where did you get the idea? That's an interesting business to create.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Murphy, so I started Murphy in 2014, and around 2015, I started to really gravitate toward more franchise. I found like a lot of my candidates that wanted to buy a resale of a franchise made great candidates for new franchise opportunities. And so I started really heavily focusing on franchise consulting, with helping them look at new opportunities. And through Murphy at that time, as a part of the franchise system, you had a membership to a broker network called IFPG. And so I was through the Murphy system, had that membership with that network. And so I was doing a lot of franchise consulting with my business brokerage business. And the founder of that company ended up becoming a mentor to me, friend to me, as a kind of, again, anomaly to the normal franchise. This has changed. There's more younger franchise consultants, but 8, 9 years ago, it was not the case. And so we started to hit it off. He called me and said, hey, I'm actually building a CRM for my network that I want to roll out to the network of consultants. Would you want to help me sell it? And my answer was no. I'm very focused on my brokerage business, but I thought about it more. I said, if this is a chance I can learn, as long as I can do it part time and focus on my main business, I'd be happy to help. And so what happened was I started calling on franchise consultants in that network, and my approach was just, hey, I'm Dan, I'm new. How's your business going? What do you need? What do you not have? And then I would start talking about CRM because again, 8-9 years ago, people were still using like Excel, and so or paper, Post-it notes, and so maybe people still do. So I've been guilty of it sometimes, but so I would talk with them, and after like a couple of months of calls, I remember going to my previous partner and saying, these they don't need CRM, they need leads. Nobody has leads in franchise consulting. Forget the CRM, they need leads first. And so we ended up deciding to partner up and build a lead generation company so that the CRM could actually have a value for them. So in 2016, co-founded a company called Career Transition Leads, and really from 2016 to 2022, my major focus was lead generation in the franchise space. And it became my absolute, franchise lead generation became my absolute focus for about almost 7 years.
Which is, I think it's a perfect segue to, one of the things that I think interested me, I found interesting was in some of your content, I think you were talking about how you guys are helping to generate leads, I think for your franchisees. So let's talk a little bit about Voda, what you guys do, how you're different in the marketplace. But how did you, I think your story of, how you kind of created it is interesting from the little I know about it. So how did you get the idea of even doing this and getting into the space?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the question because it seems so straightforward now, but like a year ago, the path seemed pretty crazy. So in building career transition leads, I had a lot of access to franchising, to CEOs and founders. I mean, I was the lead gen guy. That's a very important part of the industry. And so what I've learned is, looking back, I was provided so much opportunity to learn about being a franchisor, by being in that seat, that I was exposed to so much through that. And so in last year, 2022 in May, we had the opportunity to be acquired by a private equity firm, Princeton Equity Group. So they came in and invested into, they came in and invested into IFPG and career transition leads. And at that time, I was 29, just about to turn 30. Felt like it was the right decision for the business to bring in PE. Felt like there was someone better suited to take that company to the next level. And so I happily departed to go do my next thing. And Career Transition Leads continues to thrive. But after exiting that business, I worked for the business for 3 months. Part of my transition was agreement, and then went on. In August of last year, I was unemployed. Probably similar to you, I don't know how to sit still. So I took some time off. I annoyed my family, calling them every day. My dad, he's like, Dan, I can only golf so much or hang out so much. I don't have kids yet. So it was just kind of like, what am I doing with my time? And so pretty quickly got right back into what I would do next. And what I was saying before we started recording was, I was in the same seat as anyone that's looking at transitioning into owning a franchise business. I had to figure out what industry made sense for me to do next. I knew I looked at being a multi-unit franchisee, but being a franchisor really felt like it was the natural progression for me based on my background. And so I knew I wanted to be a franchisor, so I started looking at opportunities in the home services space. I didn't choose restoration because it's restoration. I chose it based on what we call a playbook of a checklist, really, of what we wanted out of a business. And so, I mean, I could take you through that journey if you want.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah.
All right. So basically, I knew I wanted to be a franchisor. And I was at a franchise conference in September, quickly realized that while I know franchising very well, I've never been a franchisor. So first thing I did was I went out and recruited our co-founder and COO, Zach Nolte, who has built a brand in home services and sold that brand, and then also was the president of a well-known franchise brand with about 70 open locations called Kitchen Solvers. So Zach's if I'm a franchise development expert, Zach's like the counterpart, the operations expert as a franchisor. And so we partnered up. We work really well together.
Hold on. So this is it. It's funny because you say it so casually, right? Like, yeah, I recruited Zach, but for many entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurs watching, like one of the biggest fears or things they have is like, how do I find the right team? So, like, let's dive in for a second. Like, how do you approach a conversation like that? What's your pitch? What's your like? How do you convince someone to like, hey, start up this business with me? Be our operations person. Like, what does that look like?
Well, I would go back to the content component, right? If I think about meeting you, I've seen your content. I feel like I know you as well. You see my content. I think there's a mutual understanding that we probably would get along. And if I went to have lunch with you, it's like not a random lunch. I already kind of know who you are, what you represent, and same with me. Zach and I have known each other for now it'll be, I think, 5 years, 4 years when we started talking in September. Um, he saw my content. He knows who I am, what I stand for, what I want to do. He knew my vision before I even talked to him, right? And I knew him, through the network. So I think content definitely got me the opportunity to, content is the number one way I recruit people. They come to me, they say, hey, I've been watching your stuff for 2 years. I like what you had to say. I've seen your journey. I followed you go from maybe a downtime to an uptime. So, yes, I guess, I'm very lucky to have found great people, but I do think the content component, that's why as a franchisee, I think it's important to post too. It's always be recruiting, right? If I'm at a Dunkin' Donuts and the person serving me coffee is great, I might try to recruit them too.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast episode so far. One of the most consistent things that we hear from people that reach out to us is that buying a franchise feels really confusing. There's so many options out there. It's a scary decision. They don't know how to vet or do the due diligence or really narrow down on the right franchise for them, and then they really feel alone in the process. You might be the only one in your family who's ever pursued buying a franchise or being an entrepreneur, or maybe you've tried to start a side hustle before, or other businesses like me. Like before franchising, I was not able to crack the code on entrepreneurship. I'd like to invite you to reach out and work with us. We've helped many clients buy franchises, get them profitable, or buy resale businesses that are thriving. I'm talking about highly profitable resales, great value. We've allowed many of our clients to actually quit their job right away and replace their income immediately. So if you want to work with me and my team on finding or buying a franchise, doing due diligence, vetting it, or resale, then go ahead and go to tarjohnson.com/consulting, and we're happy to see if we can help. All right, enjoy the rest of the episode. Look, I can't remember where I heard it from recently, but they said, look, one of your primary jobs as a leader of a business or the CEO is to constantly be recruiting and finding talent. That's like one of your main roles. And I don't know that most people really understand that. Like the success of your business will be in direct proportion to how badass your team is.
Yeah, I think it's the number one priority you should do. So, and if you think about it, like Zach joining us was, first of all, in our industry was a very much a, whoa, what's going on there? That looks like there's some momentum. And then his ability to recruit his team. There's a saying when you're hiring, hire the director of engineers and they'll find the engineers. And in a sense, so hire a leadership role and they'll bring, and so we have a rule at our company, or policy, if you will, that like I will never hire a support person for a leader in my organization. Our CMO is going to hire their director of marketing because they work with them, not with me. And, so Zach was able to then go recruit other members of our team, and there's kind of just been a snowball from that.
Wow. Very, very interesting. So like what does Voda do? Well, actually, so I wanted to, okay, after you kind of had this idea, I think you guys wind up like acquiring a business, right? And then franchising it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so kind of going back to that playbook, we started to just write down. Zach and I would text at night and talk, and we were looking at all different things, and we said, well, what do we want? We just wrote down exactly what we wanted. We wanted a business that was recession resistant. We wanted a business that would not, a pandemic couldn't affect. We had both been affected by those two external factors in our previous businesses. We wanted an industry that was growing, not shrinking, a need, not a want. We wanted an industry where the labor pool was simple, higher. It wasn't a skilled labor like I like plumbing because it's recession proof, but it's also a skilled labor. And so we wanted non-skilled labor,
Mm.
easy to operate, simple to scale, and a high average ticket. And so when you take all that, you only have so many industries that fit that tight, criteria. And so restoration started screaming out at us to be exactly that. And so we settled on restoration, and then we looked at about 100 businesses to acquire through different, remember my lead gen background. So we had all kinds of things coming in. And what we loved, for everything that we loved about restoration, the one thing we didn't like was that even though there's about 14,000 water damage cases a day in America, and it's not just a hurricane, there's pipes breaking, toilets overflowing, etc. If there's no water, I can't, unless I come into your house right now and put a hose through the window sneakily and flood your living room, like larceny, but with water. I can't convince you to dry your house, right? If it's not wet. And so there can be this kind of lumpiness to the revenue month over month, where I've always taught I want consistency in revenue. And so the only thing we didn't like about restorations, when we found the original business of Voda, a couple things happened. One, they do cleaning and restoration, which, believe it or not, I can't even believe it. There wasn't a franchise doing cleaning and restoration, and they complement each other really well. And really, I fell in love with the story. So the founder of originally a different business, but of the Voda framework, his name is Dragan. He's become a good friend. He moved here from Serbia in 2004, barely spoke English, scraped up money over the years, like as a lifeguard and security guard, to have the money to buy a truck and then start cleaning carpets, and went from one truck to, a $1.7 million operation that's running with, teammates. He's got a great lifestyle. And I just was so impressed with what he built. And, kind of to wrap that story up, what I was blown away by was the systems, the culture, the systems that they had, and then the reviews. There was over 2,000 five-star reviews. That just, I was like, this is something special. And that's how we ended up finding this business.
Wow. And was the business for sale, or did you find it and then like say, hey man, like we want to buy your business?
Yeah, Dragon had a vision of seeing what he was doing become a franchise. He had a vision of that becoming a franchise, but he had very specific. Business does about 23% net margin. The item 19, about $400,000, EBITDA, and he had a very set goal of taking that to a certain level for his own family and life. And every time he thought about franchising, it felt like I'm being distracted from my foundational business. And so that's how he got involved and said, hey, look, we can make this acquisition. We can take this to a national level. And you can be part of that without sacrificing, as much capital and risk. And so it's a very unique situation in that sense.
Yeah, crazy. So you had to go out, buy a business, right? And what's interesting to me is hearing how your background stacked up perfectly to lead you where you are now. And it's so interesting to me when people get so caught up on, well, should I start a business? Should I buy a franchise? Like what? They get so caught up in this, which way should I go? And it's like, it doesn't matter. Choose something. Like just like go one way. I like my bias is learn how to run a business through franchising and then go start your own thing. Like
Yeah.
if you want, right? So But it's, what's interesting is that like you've done different things and just continue to evolve. And especially, the more logical analyzers, thinkers, you guys are trying to figure out the whole picture. My analogy is you're trying to open up door number 10, but you haven't gotten through door number 1 first. You have to open up the doors sequentially, and success won't be linear. The path won't be linear like that. But it's like that analogy of when you're driving your car, your headlights can only see a few hundred feet in front of you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, anyways, I just thought that was really interesting how, the big business brokerage side and learning resales, and then, acquiring this business and the lead generation side, and how you'll wind up helping franchisees with that. So I just think it's fascinating, and I think it's a really powerful point for the folks listening.
I think it comes down to, I was always taught anytime I had a job, my dad always said, work for the job you want, not the one you have. And so I think like in anything you do what's in front of you, but then have a genuine curiosity. Like I'll give you an example. When I was a franchise, well, I wasn't a franchisee, I was an agent of Murphy to be a franchisee. And that's a whole different story. Cause I actually was turned down from being a franchisee. And that was part of the reason for leaving. Which in retrospect makes sense now because I see that I'm more of I need to create the systems. But when I was part of that system, I was thinking about like, what are they doing in the franchisor level? If you're listening to this podcast and you're a franchisee, and maybe your goal is to be multi-unit, start looking at what are the multi-unit guys or gals doing. Or if you're a multi-unit and you want to eventually someday be a franchisor, well, pay attention to what they're doing on the franchisor level. And so I think it's seeing ahead and thinking about ahead, but I don't know. I think it's just like you said, pulling the trigger and then just the rest will work itself out. And sometimes it won't. And failure is part of being an entrepreneur too. And most failures, you can recover from usually if you have the right attitude, and you'll become stronger. But just to kind of with the Voda component, what we did was, so people say to me like, well, I have never been in the restoration space. I've been out on trucks and I've learned a ton, but we made the decision, Zach and I, that we were not going to go out and open up additional corporate stores, even though there was the chance to kind of cut your teeth or test things out. What we decided instead was if we could take the capital that we would have put toward opening additional locations and instead recruit the brightest minds in restoration, we'd rather pull from them. They have that experience. So Dragon's been doing this for 14 years. He's part of the leadership team. Arthur Sturgis, our VP of operations, was part of Voda Cleaning and Service Master. And so, and he's had his own, brick and, day-to-day locations. And so instead of taking the capital to our own, we brought in someone that has, and that's kind of also been a really helpful with Voda.
Wow. Yeah. Fascinating. You remind me of my buddy, Skylar. He actually built a restoration company from scratch. That's not a non-franchise business, but they do like, I think 12 million a year. But he's like a similar personality. Like he just went into restoration admittedly because, like I think 10 years ago now, because it was just like, I could make a lot of money there. So he's like, and he just went and recruited talent and found people. He's a great, marketer like you, and which is what, I always tell like newer entrepreneurs is that your job is to recruit talent and to market. Like it doesn't matter how perfect your business is on the back end and how smoothly you can run things. If you don't have customers and clients, it means nothing. It means nothing. Your success is dependent on your ability to generate revenue. And most people, don't have that mindset. So what are you guys doing? I think you have some sort of system in place where you're helping franchisees in a different capacity than other franchisors. So tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the franchise environment has shifted drastically where you have a larger buyer pool of franchise owners. You have real estate investors now that are, I'm sure you see it in your business. You have real estate investors coming in saying, hey, you know what, real estate's not so great right now. Maybe I could get into franchising. Home services being this large opportunity for franchise investment was not maybe the case even, 5 or at least 10 years ago. And so, I think that the bar that we have to set is higher than what maybe was in the past. And so with us, what we try to do at Voda and with Playbook is really centered around. So I believe that business takes energy and it takes time. I don't care if you got a job that you do and you've got flexibility and you have a business too. That means nights and weekends and you're thinking about it at lunch and you're checking texts and you're working. And to me, this idea that you're just going to like own a business and it's just going to sit back and you're going to go lay on the beach. Yes, in the longer term, I think that's absolutely possible. But I think that there's always going to be some requirement of, if it's not time, it's mental or at least capital, right? For me, like with Voda, like I'm fortunate to have exited my previous business and be putting a lot of capital into it. But I think about Voda constantly. It's my job as the CEO is to think about and anticipate curveballs. And so what we try to do for our franchise partners is take away as much of the day-to-day repetitive areas that they may not be the best at and allow them to focus on recruiting, leading, culture, and if they're a sales type person, the ability to build relationships in their community. For me in a home services business, if everything could be done without a franchise partner, I would open up corporate stores. Why would I have franchise partners? There's a partnership for a reason. What we need out of a franchise owner is, again, that ability to lead a team, recruit a team, get in their community, go to the chamber event, go to the networking event, over drinks and meet that next property manager who can refer business. And so in order for our franchise partners to do that, we felt like we have to take a lot of things off their plate. So we have 4 pillars of support. Pillar number 1 centers around lead generation. So I like to think of us as a lead generation company that happens to sell cleaning and restoration services. And what I mean by that is we actually do all of the paid media, Google, Facebook, everything to get the phone to ring with people ready, willing, and able to use cleaning and restoration services. That's my background is lead gen. Our CMO, Christian, was part of Anytime Fitness, managing a $50 million ad budget for franchisees. Like his background is that. And so we try to do as much of that for the franchise partner. They still got to get out there, still got to build community. You can't rely on home services just on advertising, but we do that for them. Additionally, we have a national call center that answers all the calls and books all the jobs within 24 hours, 7 days a week, within 7 seconds. So that's really important. Pillar number 2 centers around hiring. So anytime in my 10 years of franchising, it's like, how am I going to get customers? I just talked about that. How am I going to satisfy those customers with employees? And so home services, finding people is obviously an element that you need to think about. We have a program called Talent Scout, which actually helps with recruiting a GM, technicians. Again, these are tools in a toolbox. They still need to use the tools, but we help with the hiring to a degree as much as we are able to legally. Pillar number 3 is back office. And so we actually do the bookkeeping and financials for our franchise partners. They get a clean P&L every month. I actually use the service we do for running Voda's financials and Playbook's financials. And it's unbelievable. Like I just tune in and I've got a whole financial report. And then that feeds into a proprietary dashboard that we created called Scoreboard, where we actually give them all their KPIs dialed in because you can't manage what isn't measured, which takes us finally, sorry, the long-winded thing here, but 4th pillar is support. So we train in the field, we train online, we train here in Madison, or we will be once this is finished being built out. And, for us to train and support our franchise partners well, we use the data from Scoreboard. So all those different services kind of tie into this general idea that we take a lot of that off their plate.
Wow, that's really, really fascinating and interesting because those are some of the questions, like simple things like that people, when they're becoming franchisees, if they never run a business or run a business like a franchise, where you can get caught up doing stuff that doesn't matter. It's not high leverage. I mean, I was a victim of this. I thought I was so cool sitting in the back of my store, entering in our DBR, daily business report, that then created a P&L, and I would sit back there for hours with the stack of receipts and enter the stuff up because I love accuracy and precision. And I wind up realizing a couple of years down the road that it was like the bookkeeper costs $160 a month. $160 a month. And I wasted hours and hours doing something that is completely not high leverage. So, I think that's really cool that you guys are taking that off of your franchisees' plates. And then lead gen. I mean, that's something where you just see that as an area that, one, people don't know because it's a very specific skill set. And then they're scared. They're scared to spend the money. Like, why? Like, sometimes it's why business owners stop marketing when your business is not doing well. So, okay, let me stop marketing and trying to get customers, because that's a logical thought process, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, we actually require a specific ad spend per month that is percentage based that we know will work, and people are signing on knowing that. Which I think what happens is there's a flywheel effect. So in other systems, here's the biggest last thing I'll say, because I don't want to speak this about Voda, but the last, like, opposed to other platforms, most platforms are buying a brand, they're inheriting mistakes maybe that were made, and then they can't really necessarily change things. I can't just call up a franchise partner and say, hey, you're going to use this CRM now. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. And so when Zach and Christian joined our leadership team, Zach on ops and Christian on marketing, the number one exercise we did was go home and write down everything you would have done differently that you couldn't change, because you can't just change your current system that's larger. And so we were able to implement what we knew would work in the long run. And, one of those being, like you said, hey, you have to market. And so before you sign this franchise agreement, I want you to understand that we're going to make sure that you do that. And that's not taking away any freedom. You still have so much control in a business. But the areas that we know are going to help make people successful, we have to do. Otherwise, as a system, we'll fail. But what happens is, if you've got 100 franchise partners all spending $2,500 a month on marketing, that's $250,000 a month. That's increasing the Voda brand awareness on the online. And that's going to be a flywheel that allows us to really dominate against other restoration brands.
Yeah, so cool, man. Dan, thanks so much for coming on. We'll drop some links in the descriptions. But if people want to go and follow your cool content and follow the journey, where should they go do that?
I think, great place is LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's just Dan Claps, the Voda. You'll see it. It's like there's only a few Dan Clapses. And then if you're interested in our business, obviously talk with you, and we'd be happy to talk.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming on, and really excited about what you're doing. I'm an admirer from afar and a near, and yeah, man, wishing you guys a lot of success.
Appreciate it.